Hello everyone, I am Demented Kirby, and welcome to my channel, the Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. On this episode of the Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on Yennett Cryptic Sovereign. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. The best way you can help support the channel is my Patreon. For just $1, patrons get early access to scheduled videos on YouTube, and higher tier patrons get access to the VIP section of my Discord server as well. You can find a link to both down in the description too. In fact, patrons got a chance to see this video earlier. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Yennett is a 3/5 Sphinx with Flying, Vigilance, and Menace for 2 generic, 1 white, 1 blue, and 1 black. Whenever Yennett attacks, you reveal the top card of your library. If the CMC is odd, you can cast it for free. Otherwise, you draw a card. What's so great about this ability is that you can't really whiff. I mean, you can technically whiff if you hit a land or can't free cast a spell, but you're still drawing the card. Also, with the way it's worded, if you do hit an odd CMC card that you don't want to cast, you can draw it instead. This gives great flexibility. Although we all know we'd rather cheat those super expensive spells than simply draw them, Yennett is one of the commanders of the top deck manipulation precons, so this is exactly what we'll be doing in order to free cast an expensive spell as often as possible. One way to guarantee having the card we want onto the top of the library is with tutors. This is also the best way to get whatever we want onto the top of our library. That's why this deck is running Mystical Tutor, Enlightened Tutor, Vampiric Tutor, Limdol's Vault, Imperial Seal, Cruel Tutor, Personal Tutor, and Liliana Vest. Of these, the best ones are those you can cast at instant speed because you can do so in response to Yennett's trigger, but we'll see why this is even more relevant later on. For the moment, manipulating the top of your library when it's most difficult for your opponents to respond to is super important. So Mystical Tutor, Enlightened Tutor, and Vampiric Tutor especially can go a long way. Fortunately, the Vampiric Tutor was reprinted in Commander Legends, so it's going to be way cheaper a week or two after release, so get your copy before they spike back up. Limdol's Vault is in this group because even though it's not strictly a tutor, it is technically a tutor since you're essentially looking through your library 5 cards at a time for the cost of 1 life each additional time. So you will eventually find what you're looking for. However, since you're then able to arrange those 5 cards however you want, it might even be more advantageous most of the time. So keep that in mind too. Imperial Seal, Cruel Tutor, and Personal Tutor are sorceries you can't cast in response to Yennett's trigger, unfortunately. The first two obviously being the best of these since you can tutor for any card. However, Personal Tutor is almost just as good in this deck since most of the bombs we want to tutor for are sorceries. Fortunately, Cruel Tutor was reprinted on the list, so its price dropped significantly. That was such a welcome surprise. Imperial Seal, however, has yet to get a decent reprint, much less a significant one. I still believe that it might happen one day, even if it's to push some future Masters product. But if you don't have one and it's currently out of your reach, don't worry, this deck has plenty of top deck manipulation, so it's not vital to the deck's success. Liliana Vest is the last of these sorcery speed top deck tutor effects. Her -2 can be done twice before you have to start upticking her again to be able to continue tutoring. However, her +1 is still great at disrupting opponents, so it's not a useless ability. Besides these top deck tutor effects, we can also put cards on the top of our library with Aminatu the Fate Shifter, Jace the Mind Sculptor, Penance, and Scroll Rack. These cards essentially allow you to put whatever card in your hand on top of your library. So if you drew a fat card that you'd rather cheat with Yennett, then put it on top of your library before you attack. Aminatu and Jace have a kind of brainstorm effect that allows you to do this without them losing any loyalty counters, so you can do so each turn, no problem. That way you can draw cards and put a card on top of your library that you wish to cheat with Yennett. The same can be done with Scroll Rack, but this can be done at instant speed and you can choose how many cards to swap between your hand and the top of your library. You can also use this to shuffle away a hand you don't need thanks to fetch lands, but we'll see those at the end of the video. Penance is possibly the best one though. With the way it's worded, you don't have to target a red or black source to activate the ability, so you can use it in response to Yennett's ability and then top deck a card you want to cheat with it. As a bonus, you're still able to use it to prevent damage from a red or black source. It's just not necessary to activate Penance. Mystic Sanctuary and Witch's Cottage also put a card on the top of the library from the graveyard, but it's a one-time only deal since it's when they enter the battlefield untapped. Since the deck runs basics and plenty of dual type lands, it shouldn't be an issue most of the time. Also, they have a basic land type of their own so they can be fetched for in a pinch if we need to. These lands help us not only recover a specifically typed card from our graveyard, but we can then cheat it with Yennett. They're also lands that tap for colored mana, so they don't really take up a slot in the deck. Besides, literally putting what we want on the top of the library, we can also manipulate the top of our library the old-fashioned way by scrying. Jace, Mirror Mage, Crystal Ball, Castle Vantress, Aqueous Form, and Thassa God of the Sea are included in the deck precisely for that. When we scry, not only can we see and manipulate what comes next, but if we don't want it there, we can send it to the bottom. Jace is great since he's cheap to cast and cheap to kick. Getting a copy of Jace means that we can scry 2 twice in a turn if need be, all for just 5 mana. We can also do the same with Crystal Ball but at instant speed at the cost of 1 mana and tapping, so in a sense it's slightly better than Jace. The castle costs way more to scry 2, but it is on a colored mana producing land that can enter the battlefield untapped, so it doesn't really take up a slot in the deck, so it's good in a pinch. Aqueous Form is amazing since it only costs 1 mana to cast and can also make Yennett unblockable. So we can attack with her with no fear of Yennett dying to getting blocked, and we scry 1 each time she attacks, which is great. Thassa scries 1 during our upkeep, so it at least filters our draw. Similarly to the aura, she can also be used to make Yennett unblockable. What's great about all these spells is that they can also be cheated with Yennett if we happen to reveal them to her trigger. We can also scry 1 with Nubenalia, Zalfarin Void, Temple of Deceit, Temple of Enlightenment, and Temple of Silence when they enter the battlefield. As with the other lands we've seen so far, this effect is only once when they enter the battlefield. But with the exception of the Void, they can tap for colored mana so they don't really take up a slot in the deck. The Void makes up for this by entering untapped. Doom Whisper is another way we can kind of scry 2 since it's Surveil 2. Surveil still lets us rearrange the top cards of our library, but if we don't want them there, we mill them away instead of bottom decking them. What's great about Doom Whisper, apart from being a 5 mana, thus odd costed, 6/6 flyer with trample, is that its Surveil ability costs no mana to activate, so we can use it at instant speed as well to dig through our deck until we find what we want. We can also simply rearrange the top cards of our library with Halimar Depths, Sensei's Divining Top, and Soothsaying. Halimar Depths is also a land with a one-time only effect, but it can also tap for color, so even though it enters the battlefield tapped, it doesn't take up a slot in the deck. The top is potentially one of the best cards of the deck since it can be used to rearrange the top 3 cards at instant speed for just 1 mana, and it can draw your card in a pinch replacing itself. Costing 1 means that you can cheat it with Yennett, so worst case scenario is you not revealing to your opponents what you drew from it. Soothsaying is also an amazing card in the deck since it can dig as deep as you can pay for. This can also help in digging for specific cards you'd want to cheat with Yennett. It can also be used to shuffle your library if the next cards aren't going to be helpful. The final card to help manipulate the top of the deck is Explorer Scope. If we were to have a land on the top of our library, if Yennett is equipped with the scope, we can arrange this attack triggers in such a way that the scope resolves first. It'll put the land onto the battlefield tapped. Then Yennett's trigger resolves and we can cheat our spell if we can. This allows us to not only still get the Yennett trigger but cheat a land onto the battlefield as well, further accelerating our deck in case Yennett gets taken care of and needs to be recast later on, or if we simply have to end up hard casting our more expensive spells. As to protect Yennett, look no further than Swiftfoot Boots, Lightning Greaves, Dark Steel Plate, and Hammer of Nazam. The first 2 give haste, allowing us to take advantage of Yennett right out of the gate while also protecting her from targeted spells and effects. The other 2 give Indestructible, with the plate having the added bonus of being indestructible itself. The hammer is amazing since it can auto-equip onto Yennett when it enters the battlefield and can do the same for other equipment when they enter the battlefield as well. Sephara Sky's Blade also makes Yennett indestructible since she has flying. However, the deck has plenty of other flyers that can take advantage of Sephara's boon, but we'll see those beaters soon when I discuss how the deck wins. Sephara can also not only be cheated in with Yennett, but has the potential of costing only 1 white mana to cast. Reconnaissance is another way to protect Yennett during combat if you don't have any other ways of making her unblockable. It only costs 1 mana to cast and 0 to activate. You can simply activate it in response to any blocking shenanigans after Yennett's ability has already resolved. Either way, Rogue's Passage and Venser the Sojourner are also included to keep ensuring combat isn't an issue for Yennett. The deck's already running Aqueous Form and Thassa as we saw earlier, but Rogue's Passage is a land so it doesn't take up a slot in the deck. Also, Venser makes all creatures unblockable that turn, so he also helps with one of the win cons of the deck. He can also be used to delay blink any permanent we control, which can help with resetting planeswalkers as well as getting another instance of enter the battlefield triggers from the previously mentioned lands as well as some of the creatures we'll see soon. However, in order to make the absolute most of Yennett's ability, the deck is running Strionic Resonator and Lithoform Engine. Sure, the engine can be used to copy instants, sorceries, and permanent spells we control, but more importantly, it costs the same as Strionic Resonator to activate. So in response to Yennett's trigger, if we manage to have both, we can cheat 3 odd CMC spells in that same combat step with Yennet, which is pretty insane, especially if we're manipulating the top of our library multiple cards at a time. If we manage to use the effects which top deck a lot of cards like Scroll Rack or rearrange a lot of cards like Soothsaying, we might end up free casting all of our expensive spells quite frequently. And that's pretty much the engine to make the deck win. Being able to free cast our bombs while the rest of the table is far behind in terms of resources is our safest route to victory. The deck is cheating in things like Void Winnower, Artisan of Kozilek, Pathraiser of Ulamog the Infinite Gyre, Emrakul the Promised End, and Runescarred Demon. The Eldrazi are especially oppressive since we'll still get the cast triggers off of Yennett's ability because we're casting them for 0. Void Winnower is super oppressive since a lot of board wipes and counterspells are even costed. The Eldrazi with Annihilator are even more so if we get them out early enough, because after a couple of combat phases, opponents will have no other recourse but to sacrifice their lands. Runescarred Demon is a tutor on a body, so when it enters the battlefield we can tutor for anything we need and put it right into our hand. With what I mentioned earlier, most of the beaters are flyers, so Sephara makes them indestructible as well. However, attacking with a couple of huge monsters like these each turn might not be enough to secure the win. We want to be able to attack as often as possible with as little interference and interaction as possible in order to really overwhelm the board. So what else can we cheat with Yennet besides these absolute units? Extra turn spells. The deck's running Nexus of Fate, Temporal Manipulation, Time Warp, and Capture of Jingzhou. The reason it's running all these and not every other extra turn spell is because the first one reshuffles itself back into the deck and the other three don't exile themselves when they resolve. This is super important for what the deck wants to accomplish, which I'm going to get to in a bit. If Capture of Jingzhou is something you don't have and aren't playing online, then you can just as easily swap it out for Temporal Mastery. While this one does exile itself after it resolves, it has Miracle, so with all of our top deck manipulation, we can cast it for just 2 mana. So while Capture of Jingzhou is great for this particular build, the deck already has Temporal Mastery and Time Warp, so you don't really need it for the deck to run as it should. In any case, these spells are amazing because this presents the potential of getting infinite turns. The deck has plenty of different ways of achieving infinite turns as well. One way is thanks to Venser and Mystic Sanctuary. When we cast either Temporal Manipulation, Time Mark, or Capture of Jingzhou, we'll get our extra turn. We can then delay blink the Sanctuary with Venser, putting that extra turn spell back on top of our library. We then draw into it our next turn. We cast it to get our extra turn. We then delay blink it again with Venser. We do what we'll do in our turn, hopefully cheating in more bombs with Yennett. Then the land returns, top decking our extra turn spell once more. We can also get an infinite loop with Nexus of Fate and Runescarred Demon. If we delay blink the demon with Venser, it will always get us Nexus of Fate into our hand just as the land gets the extra turn spell onto our library. And these are just infinite loops where we're hard casting these extra turn spells. If we have any previously mentioned effect that allows us to put a card onto our library, we can just put those extra turn spells on there and cheat them with Yennet to save on mana. We can also maximize our extra turn spells even further with Swarm Intelligence, which can fortunately also be cheated in with Yennet. Not only will this copy our extra turn spells, we're able to take infinite turns, but we can also copy our tutors with it. Now, you might think that copying a tutor is useless because after each one resolves, you're shuffling your deck. But not if you fill your stack accordingly. This is what you do. Let's say we have Swarm Intelligence, Psionic Resonator, and Yennet on the battlefield with Mystical Tutor in our hand. We attack with Yennet. In response, we cast Mystical Tutor, triggering Swarm Intelligence. We let the copy resolve first, getting us Nexus of Fate. It goes to the top of the library. In response to the original Mystical Tutor resolving, we copy Yennett's trigger with the Resonator, entering the stack. Yennett's copy trigger resolves, casting Nexus of Fate for free, triggering Swarm Intelligence. The copy resolves, giving us an extra turn. The original resolves, giving us another extra turn, and then gets shuffled back into our library. We're now to the original Mystical Tutor, which resolves, top decking Nexus of Fate again. Now Yennett's original trigger resolves, free casting Nexus of Fate, which again gets copied with Swarm Intelligence. This essentially gets you 4 extra turns. With Liliana Vez, you can potentially keep getting Nexus of Fate onto the top of the library to get 2 extra turns each time thanks to Swarm Intelligence. Another way we can win, if beatdown isn't an option, is thanks to Baneful Omen and Sorin Grim Nemesis. Being able to put the highest costed card from our hand onto the library each time with our top deck manipulation effects, they can deal a ton of damage to the entire table, and thus give us the win with only a couple of extra turns. Either way, once we start a loop of infinite turns, opponents might concede and we get our victory. But at least make it obvious you're going to win thanks to it before you do otherwise, because then it might seem even more obnoxious if you're just taking extra turns and doing nothing productive with them. As with all decks, we can't assume opponents are going to just sit back and take it. We're going to need responses. The deck's running Ingaruk's Wake and Plague Wind to sweep all opponents' creatures. Fortunately, these have an odd CMC so you can cheat them with Yennet early on if someone is too far ahead in creatures and poses a potential threat. Either way, either of these are also great to cast when you set up your board state in order to attack undeterred. An overloaded Cyclonic Rift also gets the job done in a pinch. Unfortunately, its overload cost is an alternate cost, so you can't cheat it with Yennet. In any case, it's fine because this is usually overloaded in response to something dire. Since we're cheating most of our spells, we should have the mana to overload it anyways. Blazing Archon is also a great way to protect us from creature-heavy decks while we set up our engines and combos. Not only does it prevent us from being attacked, but it's a 5/6 flyer, so it's also quite the beater. It also gets indestructible thanks to Sephara. Elish Nor Grand Cenobite also does a good job at wiping the board, albeit from weenies and most tokens. And even if she doesn't kill off all creatures right off the bat, she has Vigilance and gives all of our creatures +2/+2. so she makes our victory come even faster by pumping up our already large army of monsters. Luminate Primordial doesn't have an area of effectability, but it is able to exile up to one creature per opponent, which is nothing to scoff at. Cheating this onto the battlefield early on is quite oppressive, especially since it has Vigilance, so it also doubles as a blocker after attacking. Thanks to Venser or Aminatu, this is even more troublesome when delay blinked. Our opponents might gain life, but it won't matter if they can't block our beaters. The deck does have single target removal as well in the shape of Generous Gift, Spine of Ishsa, and Angel of Despair. All three of these can get rid of any permanent, which also includes any bothersome land. The Spine and the Angel can also be reutilized thanks to getting Delay Blink with Venser or Aminatu. While the deck isn't a blinking deck, the synergy of the deck and how Venser can do things makes it so we can take the most advantage of these effects. The Angel also doubles as a beater too that can gain Indestructible with Saphira as well. We don't need to destroy or exile opponents' things either. We can steal them too thanks to Expropriate and Blatant Thievery. Never give opponents extra turns with Expropriate, especially this deck which takes extra turns anyways. Again, these being odd costed makes them perfect for this deck. Casting them early on can be quite oppressive. Copying them with Swarm Intelligence makes them even more oppressive. Finally, Fierce Guardianship and Teferi's Protection are used to protect our own board state from opponents' responses. Fierce Guardianship will more than likely be cast for free thanks to controlling Yennett in order to get rid of anything that might be a bother as a spell, and Teferi's Protection is a given. It protects us from pretty much anything, so this can come in more than clutch. In order to have these responses at hand, we need to be able to draw into our deck. The deck already has plenty of ways to manipulate the top of the library, tutor, and so forth, but having a couple of strict draw effects peppered in for good measure can go a long way. The deck's running Sphinx's Revelation and Stroke of Genius at instant speed ways to draw a ton of cards, with the aptly named Sphinx's Revelation gaining us life in the process. Casting these at the end of the turn before ours, with all of our leftover mana, can help us fill our hand with things we might need. Things we want to cheat out can then just be put back on top of our library. We can also obtain a ton of cards with Necropotence at the cost of life. However, Necropotence doesn't just get us a card at the cost of 1 life each time, it also skips our draw step. So if we top deck something outside of our turn for Yennett, we won't draw into it, so we can then cheat it with Yennett. Filling our hand at the end of our turn means that we can also put back any amount of cards beyond our maximum hand size thanks to the previously mentioned Penance, which combos great with Necropotence here. Or skip your discarding altogether with Reliquary Tower, which also combos great with Necropotence. Not having a maximum hand size means we can dig super deep with Necropotence without needing to exile away down to maximum hand size during our cleanup phase. It's also a mana generating land that doesn't enter the battlefield tapped, so it doesn't take up a slot. Lastly, we're going to need mana to fuel this deck. We might be cheating in all of our bombs, but we still need to cast Yennett, our other spells, as well as activating our abilities. Lacking green means that our only route is mana rocks like Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, and Fulwar Stone. These are good enough for the deck since they are relatively cheap and can help cast in early game Yennett. Thanks to all the reprints, Mana Crypt is now relatively accessible. However, if you still can't get one, no worries since it's not entirely necessary for the deck to function. Same with the overhyped Jewel Lotus. Since Yennett costs 2 generic and 1 of each color, the Lotus can help with one of those colors and the other 2 can be used for the generic cost, making Yennett way easier to cast out early in the game. However, as of the recording of this video, the Lotus is ridiculously overpriced. It's not an auto-include in every deck and it's either good or bad depending on the situation. Soul Ring is better, but that's a discussion for another time. In any case, while it's amazing at getting out an early Yennett, it's not necessary for the deck to function, and you might as well run something like Dark Ritual in its place and get more or less the same effect. Gilded Lotus and Skyclave Relic are a bit costly, but included because they can be free cast with Yennett. What's great about doing this with Skyclave Relic is that Kicker is an additional cost, so even though we're casting it for free with Yennett, we can pay the Kicker cost and get the copies of Skyclave Relic. It's also indestructible, so that helps out in us keeping at least 3 mana rocks after an artifact wipe. The rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. The deck's running all 9 fetch lands, all 3 dual lands, all 3 shock lands, Command Tower, City of Brass, Mana Confluence, Reflecting Pool, and Ancient Tomb, as well as 1 of each snow-covered basic land in case anyone is running anything that benefits us for it. As always, the dual lands aren't entirely necessary for the deck to run, and you can just as easily swap them out for budget alternatives and the deck will still run well enough. Same goes for the more expensive fetch lands, but fortunately they're going to be significantly reprinted in Modern Horizons 2, which isn't supposed to be a reprint set, but who cares, they're significantly reprinting the fetch lands. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Yennett Cryptic Sovereign. I know this deck is incredibly mean considering you're not only cheating expensive spells in the early game, but you're also taking extra turns, potentially infinitely many extra turns. However, you can very easily take out the Infinite Turns package and build this as a beatdown deck if that sort of thing ain't your bag. However, any kind of game-ending combo is the same in terms of outcome, whether it's infinite damage, infinite combat steps, infinite turns, etc. But this is still a very brutal way to build Yennet, so hopefully this can inspire some of the more spiky players out there. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link, that also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I'm Demented Kirby, and happy brewing.